Everyone. Thank you for joining us for a big table discussion, Gather Around Justice. The purpose of this conversation is to foster mindful conversation around the changes that need to be made in our region to correct historic, racial, economic, and social inequities. Again, welcome on behalf of the Big Table Greater Peoria. I am Shanika Cagle, the Vice President of Operations with the Peoria Chamber of Commerce, just one entity involved with the Big Table Greater Peoria. Want you to know that this is a safe space for everyone to ask questions respectfully. We do understand that this could be an uncomfortable conversation for many people, but it is an important one that we feel needs to be had. We know that this is not the ideal format for this conversation, but because of the COVID-19 regulations that are in place right now, we wanted to have the conversation sooner rather than later. And so now we are going to, I'm going to turn over to Audrey Cam to tell you a little bit more about logistics.
Hey everyone, just want to say welcome on behalf of the Big Table. We're so thrilled that so many people have responded to this event. I think there's over 100 in here right now and they're still flowing in. So we did increase the number of people that we allowed in the meeting. And with that said, we kind of pivoted a little bit about how people would be interacting during the meeting. So because of a large number, we're asking that all the participants that aren't panelists or presenters stay muted during the meeting. We do, however, like Shanika said, encourage participation, and that can happen in two different ways. One, you could use the reaction buttons at the bottom, or you can utilize the chat box. So if you want to send a message to everyone, make a comment or a question for everyone to see, you can do that in the chat box. If you have something you want to ask that you don't necessarily feel comfortable having the whole group see, feel free to send that directly to Shanika Cagle. She's listed as a co-host in your chat box, and she'll make sure to get your question to the moderator. Now, with that said, we have prepared questions based on some of the questions you all sent in ahead of time. And so thank you to everyone that submitted questions. We had a great response. And like I said, we have people monitoring the chat. However, because there's so many people in here and we do want to keep this to an hour, we're not going to be able to probably get to everyone's question. But we are planning to make this a series of discussions. And so we hope that we can get to your questions eventually. And also we're going to be sending out additional resources after this panel and some frequently asked question documents as well. So if you have something specific for someone on this panel, we'll try to get that answered for you if we can't get to it during the meeting. So with all that said, it's time to introduce our panel and our moderator. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Andre Allen. Andre works in higher education administration and he is a wonderful volunteer for us. So Andre, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Audrey and Shanika, and welcome everyone to this amazing discussion that we're having today. Although this isn't the format we would all hate, you all have committed and demonstrated that you are wanting to be part of the solution in our region, and that's very important. I can feel the passion through the screens right now. So I really appreciate you all taking this time on this Tuesday evening to join around the table for this discussion. It's very important that we have these discussions. Although potentially uncomfortable, they are needed in order for us to move forward in our society. If you think about it, we just celebrated Juneteenth week this past weekend. One of the more celebrated Juneteenth in my lifetime that I can remember. And I think that that's because right now America is currently looking itself in the mirror and realizing, well, majority of us are realizing that we don't like what we see. And we realize that we want to be part of the solutions and making sure that that is justice for everyone, regardless of their race, religion, creed, and sexual orientation. And so that's why we're here gathered today, because every citizen in our region deserves to have justice. Every citizen in our region deserves to have a seat at the table. And so we have an amazing panelist today. They're going to be demonstrating their commitment to justice and some of the great things that they've been doing in the community. And so I'm going to first start off and have her introduce herself, Ms. Mariah. And Mariah, if you could please introduce yourself, the organization that you're representing, the position that you hold within that organization, and any other pertinent information that you would like to give us today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mariah Cooley. I am a sophomore political science major at Howard University. I am representing Young Revolution, and I serve as their chief of staff, and I'm also one of the founding members. We were responsible for holding the protest in regards to George Floyd, and we had another rally, and we had the biggest protest in Peoria's history, so we've gotten a lot of attention because of that, and we really are here to have a great conversation to discuss the next steps and things of that nature. And I'm also a part of March for Our Lives, which is a gun violence prevention organization, and I serve as the co-founder and legislative director of that organization at Howard.
Thank you so much, Ms. Cooley. We really appreciate you being here today and bringing some much valued youth to the table. So thank you so much. Next, I would like to introduce Sheriff Asbell.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Andre. I don't have quite the introduction as Mariah does. I'm not that involved. I'm your sheriff here in Peoria County. I've been here a quarter of a century, 25 years. Background in corrections, policing, investigations. I ran the jail as jail superintendent prior to being appointed sheriff back in 2017. So I got about 3 years on the job in this current position. And we get into the questions, you'll see a little bit more about my background in relation to what some of my passions are in relation to recidivism and reentry and other community needs. So glad to be here. Thank you.
Sorry there, I was muted. Sheriff, thank you so much for joining us today and bringing that unique experience and your background to the table today. And last but certainly not least, someone who track record in Peoria is second to none, Dr. Ali.
Thank you, Andre. I'm really happy to be a part of this discussion today on justice. My name is Rita Ali, and I'm Vice President of Workforce and Diversity at Illinois Central College, also an at-large member of the Peoria City Council. I've worked in the areas of diversity and social justice and workforce development for over 25 years, combined at ICC and Bradley University and within the Peoria community. I've been involved in nonviolent social change efforts similar under the direction of Dr. Martin Luther King and his Center for Social Justice, Center for Nonviolent Social Change, and also in police community relations efforts. And I've lived through, as a child, the civil rights movement. But I can tell you that through all those moments and movements, there's none like today. The call for justice today is fierce, and it's coming from people of every skin tone under the sun, of every age and every gender, and really every region from around our world. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said that every major race riot in America has stemmed from some police action. We've seen that from Watts to Rodney King to George Floyd. But I believe that this time will be different in that we will be forced to address racism in a manner that results in changes in the way that we think and act, work, and play. So let's talk about justice.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Ali. And that was make this particular movement so unique, that there's so many different people from so many different backgrounds wanting to be a part of the change. And it's reflected in today's discussion and a number of participants that we have part of this call. So thank you so much. So just to talk about the format of today's discussion, we have some pre-planned questions that I will be asking each of our panelists. And then from there, I will be going into some of the questions that were submitted ahead of time for this discussion. And then also, as Audrey said, if time permits, we'll address some of the questions that people may put within the chat function. So that is going to be the format of today's panel. So I want to go ahead and start with Miss Mariah Cooley, who is a rookie to the game, but she's behaving like a veteran. And she is hitting the ground running and bringing, again, some much needed youth to the proceedings. So Mariah, as you stated in your intro, you all have led some pretty big protests, some of the most largest protests in the history of our city. But for those who are new to the call and maybe don't know what Young Revolution is, why don't you go ahead and give them a little background about Young Revolution?
Yes, so Young Revolution was started after, you've seen the world react to what happened to George Floyd, and we're a group of young adults who decided to get together, and we wanted to see change, so we made change. And so our goal is to promote unity across Peoria and to cultivate relationships with leaders and other organizations, and most importantly, to advocate and to seek justice for all oppressed groups. And that's really been our goal thus far. Like I said, we had our first protest, and then we had a rally. And so with that rally, we had a silent march led by drums. And this was to honor one of the first protests that we have seen, which was in New York City in 1917. And they were protesting against lynching and discrimination. So we decided, in order to honor those civil rights activists who came before us, we would have one of our own here in Peoria, where we had a silent march led by drums, and then it led to a community discussion, kind of similar to this. And so I'm really excited to be here and to give my opinion about these things.
Thank you so much. And again, I applaud you as young as you are, and having a sense of ownership, and feeling that you need to be part of the proceedings at your age. When I was a sophomore in college, I was worrying about some different things. I'm not going to say those things because it's getting recorded right now. But I really applaud you for the acts that you're doing, and the impact that Young Revolution is making, because we need our youth to lead these things, because you are part of the change. So we really, really appreciate that. So Mariah, I have a follow-up question for you. What is one action that everyone can take today to make our community more just and safer? And what are actions that we must continue, and what are actions that we must discontinue?
So one action that everyone can take today, that everyone is taking today, is to educate yourself and to listen. When you're willing to listen, you'll be brought in a lot of knowledge that can further your opinions about certain things, further your involvement. Maybe you want to start getting involved in the community more, because now you've been equipped with all the knowledge to do so. Also, one thing that you can do is register to vote. And if you're not registered to vote, do that. Encourage everyone around you to register to vote. Our biggest voice is on the ballot, and when we're holding elected officials accountable, that's the best way we get to see change. I would say what actions that we must discontinue is being unwilling to listen, or falling into fake media, and just not having an open mind. An open mind leads to an open mind leads to opportunities, and a closed mind does not. So as long as you are willing to listen, which everyone here is today, then I believe that Peoria will see the change that we're looking for.
Thank you so much. Very well stated. I want to share a quote that I think coincides with what you just said. I saw this actually on, it was on Twitter actually, some productive stuff coming from Twitter, right? In order to empathize with someone's experience, you must be willing to believe them as they see it, and not how you imagine their experience to be. And that's Miss Brene Brown. And so when we're thinking about these action steps and what we can do, one of the first steps is having a level of empathy and understanding and compassion. So I just wanted to share that with the group.
That's perfect.
Mariah, my last question that I have for you, and then we'll move on to Sheriff Asbell. Outside of police reform, in your opinion, what are some other strategies our community can begin in to working through our history and rectifying historic injustices?
Aside from educating yourself and registering yourself to vote, I think looking into legislation and policies so that we can have these things implemented to prevent things from happening again. And that's why I'm a lobbyist with March for Our Lives, and I lobby on a lot of gun violence prevention policies, because as you all know, gun violence is very high in Peoria and very high in Illinois. So if we have these policies in place that can lead to de-escalation training, or putting more money into low-income communities and things of that nature, we'll see gun violence go down and the everyday lives of all Americans improve. So I think one thing that's really important is legislation, holding your elected officials accountable, calling them and be like, do you know about this bill? Can you co-sponsor this bill? What's your opinion on it? And if it's something that's not working towards bettering, the community, or if they don't agree with it, then make your voice heard on the ballot box in November.
I couldn't said it better myself, being part of the process and voting, because policy and legislation ultimately changes behavior, and changes behavior will change hearts. And so we have to start with our policy and our legislation in order to have that influence. So thank you so much, Mariah. I really appreciate that. Sheriff Asbell, these next series of questions will be for you, sir. What is law enforcement doing right now, and what do you think that it could be doing differently when you talk about the scope of injustice in our region?
Yeah, Andre, I'll start by answering that one by just acknowledging that I truly love this profession, and I love the men and women that work in it. There's so many things that police do right every day, but unfortunately, the good is often overshadowed by the bad. And I couldn't be prouder of the work my staff does each and every day. But often, and as we've seen here in the last couple months, we get lumped into this negative conversation. You know, one of the first things I did when I became sheriff out here was change our mission statement, our vision, our value statements, and it's 3 words. It's to help people, and it's that mindset that every day you come to work that you're here to help someone, and it's centered around legitimacy. And I think legitimacy should be the goal for every police organization in the United States. And if those that don't understand what legit means, it's basically a belief that police are doing the right thing, and there's a level of cooperation with the community because of that. And it's based on a foundation of procedural justice. And there's 4 pillars to procedural justice that all center around a sense of fairness. And I think that is the priority. It has been a priority here at this agency, and it will continue to be so. But I can't sit here and not acknowledge that there is not problems in the system.
Thank you, Sheriff. We've been hearing calls from communities all around the country for police reform. What does police reform mean to you? And what doesn't the public understand potentially about this concept of police reform? And where is the middle ground to get people that they're heard and change is possible?
How much time do I have?
Hey, be great, Sheriff. Be great.
Well, time me out on this one because this could be a long answer. But I'm known as, you know, a reformist type sheriff. I talk often of system failures. I've said often that the criminal justice system is a racially biased system, and let me explain that, because sometimes my words get taken out of context, and that's happened here in the last couple of weeks. I actually was down at the rally several weeks ago, and I talked to the group, and I made a statement about, you know, rotten apples versus rotten trees, and saying that there's these systemic problems in the criminal justice system. And I just don't want that taken out of context. I call those that work this profession racist by any means. Again, I'd be calling myself racist. I'd be calling my employees racist. What I talk about is the system, and this acknowledging that it is a racially biased system. And this sometimes upsets me because people will point the fingers at the police. I mean, from a historical perspective, we have to understand that there's laws and policies that have been made to disadvantage African American citizens, especially concerning economic and housing opportunities. These laws have created a system of generational poverty, and poverty and urban density has influenced, or has been influenced by practices such as redlining. These high volume poverty areas, you're going to have a higher crime rate. You're going to have a higher crime rate. And when you have a higher crime rate, look at it through my lens, where now I have to put more resources in that area, more resources in that urban area. And let's be honest, it's not areas with skin color of mine. And so you're going to have more police encounters. more police encounters, what's going to happen? You're going to have more contacts. You're going to have more tickets. You're going to have more arrests, and that lies the problem right there. I mean, it's a vicious cycle where individuals who live in poverty, who get a police record because of oversaturation of resources in the area, they fall victim again. They fall back into this cycle that's affected generation after generation. And I want to mention something that Mariah just talked about policy and legislation, and that's one of my biggest arguments here is, the police don't make the laws. We enforce them. The police do enforce the laws, and I mean, I'll use the case in point. Just last week, we had a U.S. senator that was talking about police reform, and granted, that is the conversation right now. However, it's the same senator that's pointing fingers at the police was responsible or a big part of the 1994 Crime Act, which was a war on drugs, which was, it created so many of these system failures that we're dealing with today. So much of this conversation, when I say these biases, it's the government, it's the these elected officials, and they have to be held accountable. So the last part of your question is, how is your voice heard? And I'll echo again what Mariah just said. It's in the voting booth, and that's really where you'll have some systemic changes which are needed.
Thank you, Sheriff. And I think it's very important that you brought up some historical context. And I think that that's what we have to start doing as citizens, is reviewing our history. We have to know where we came from in order to know where we're going. And so I referenced earlier that Juneteenth was just this past weekend, and Juneteenth signified the official abolishment of slavery 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed in 1863 by President Abraham Lincoln. Enslaved Black Americans in Texas did not find out about this until 1865. And then after they were free, we understand these things created to still disenfranchise them. Things called Black codes, which were essentially bogus laws that were created to target Black Americans in America. Certain laws such as walking along a railroad track. Well, if you don't have a horse and buggy, how are you getting around? You're walking. And so if you get caught walking around this railroad track, you get arrested. And when you get arrested, you go to prison. And then you have this concept of convict leasing that gets created, where prisons were creating agreements with private companies and having convicts who were working for these companies in coal mines and things of that nature. So now you have an imprisonment of 30% Black Americans working in these prisons in this convict leasing arrangement. So these are different things that our country has gone through, and that leads us to where we are today. So I definitely challenge everyone to continue to do their research, not necessarily to bring some gloom to this discussion, but this historical context is very important. So thank you, Sheriff. My last question that I have for you, and then I'm going to move on to Dr. Ali. What is one thing that you would change right now about the criminal justice system to make it more just?
That's,
you got a genie?
Yeah, there's,
get a wish.
And we've had this conversation, I've had it, the last 10 years, but specifically these last couple months, ever since, the tragedy in Minneapolis with George Floyd, take it to a whole different level. And we're trying to find a micro solution for a macro problem. And that's really hard to do. But I've always said you have to start somewhere. It's these little steps that you can do. I've got so many different solutions, but I'll start with one of my favorite quotes from Brian Stevenson, who's an attorney, and it's wealth, not culpability, shapes outcomes. Wealth, not culpability, shapes outcomes. I've seen this time and time again by either working the jail or running the jail, being down in the courts, being involved with that part of it, where we really, could have a tangible goal here in the area or the state even to work on the public defender system. It's totally underfunded, and it goes hand in hand with the plea bargain system. Right? We've seen this time and time again where someone will take a plea because they were scared of the alternative, and that can influence someone's life forever. It influences, potentially housing. It influences education opportunities, and especially employment. So that would be one of the key things that I would focus on right now are, putting funds into that, the pretrial release system as well, but the public defender, and really just restructuring the whole plea bargain system.
No, that's a great point, Sheriff. Our public defenders, they work very hard, but they're overworked. And a lot of times, a person might not get that true representation that they need because of that. So thank you so much, Sheriff.
You're welcome.
Now I want to transition to Dr. Ali, and your track record in Peoria has demonstrated your commitment to improving the lives of those within our city. As an expert in this field, what is one thing you would want the community to understand when it comes to racial, economic, and social equity, excuse me?
Thank you, Andre. And I agree with everything that I heard from Mariah and Chief Asbell, and they give me so much hope and they inspire me. I appreciate you both so much, and you too, Andre. But of course, there's more than just one thing. I want people to understand that African Americans and Hispanics, Latinos, American Indian citizens are disproportionately poor, have limited access to a quality education, and that they're typically underrepresented in positions of power. I want people to understand that there's a 10-year gap lifespan for a Black person living on Peoria's south side and a white person living on the far north part of Peoria. That the unemployment rate for Black youth in Peoria was off the charts prior to COVID-19. I want people to understand that Black people live discrimination on a daily basis in one way or another, and that without intentional and focused efforts to address equity and racial justice in our society, in our community, that the gaps will continue and that they're going to affect all of us. Racism, unfortunately, is built into the fabric of our justice system, our healthcare and education institutions, our government, and within many of our corporations. But equity means sharing power. It means sharing resources and providing opportunities for everybody. It's actually greater than equality because equity means sometimes treating people differently, giving them additional support because everybody's not starting at the same place. The playing field is not level. So justice is removing the barriers and allowing everyone the opportunities that they need to succeed.
Yeah, thank you so much. We understand that Peoria was ranked one of the worst cities for African Americans according to the Wall Street Journal, and we've slid down that list a little bit, but we're still on the naughty list, and we need to get off. But one of the things that they talked about was the unemployment of African Americans in Peoria, and pre-COVID was at around 17 to 18%. Now, pre-COVID, the national average for African American unemployment rate was around 6%, which is a record low. But here within this area, we're 3 times the national record. And so those are some of those issues that we have to address when you have a population that makes up close to 30% of the population in this area.
And I would add, if I may, to that, Andre, in terms of those unemployment numbers, there are a good number of people who are not even included in those numbers because they're not even considered in the labor market, which means they're not counted. And disproportionately, those are also people of poverty and people of color.
Thank you for that context. Dr. Ali, you are wearing multiple hats today. And so I want to ask you a question that's kind of address both of the hats that you wear. What is Illinois Central College and the city of Peoria doing to address issues around racial, economic, and social inequity? And what are some things these entities have gotten right? And what are some things that you hope that they can do better?
Those are great questions. At ICC, we've been on a journey, this racial justice and equity journey that we started intentionally 2 years ago. We applied for a grant through the Lumina Foundation, and it came after the incidents in Charlottesville. And it was a grant that would help colleges across the country to begin to take up dialogue on issues of racial justice. And we applied and said that we needed money to help, facilitate these discussions within our campus. We actually partnered with Peoria Public Schools to do it, and we put on a summit last year called the Peoria Summit on Racial Justice and Equity. And we began some joint discussions and involved students as well as, staff, instructors, employees. And, taking that further, we are looking at our policies, our procedures, our practices, and our systems, and we're trying to identify where the barriers are and remove barriers and to create what we call pro-equity policies, pro-equity practices. So we want to build equity within the system. So it involves training, helping to develop cultural competencies within the individual so that we can hopefully create a foundation that will lead to a framework of equity within all of our divisions and our college as a whole. And I would say with the city of Peoria, that's a value that a unique value that I think I bring to the city is having some background in this area called diversity and inclusion and equity. And, hopefully we can also, and I believe that we're headed in that direction, is making equity part of our agenda, having an equity agenda within the city of Peoria. And I believe that there's going to be some things that you're going to see. I don't want to preempt anything, but I believe that you're going to see some things from the city, perhaps also in collaboration with some other entities that are making a strong commitment in this area of racial justice and equity.
That's great to hear. That's great to hear. Thank you so much. And the last question that I have for you is, what can the broader community and business leaders do actively to play a part in racial and economic justice in our region?
Yeah, great question. The broader community, business leaders are key stakeholders within our community. And I say it starts with us looking at ourselves, looking at our institutions, and beginning some dialogue. And really, it's making a commitment, making a commitment to address issues of diversity within the workforce, address issues of fairness within policies and procedures and behaviors, creating policies for no tolerance when it comes to discrimination, and collaborating with institutions that are, have been on the journey and working together. We can only do this if we work together in unity as a city. And I don't believe that we're the worst city for African Americans, and I believe that we have some great disparities, true indeed. But I think that we can be one of the best cities for racial justice and equity if we would all come together and work together toward that common goal.
I agree as well too. And we all understand that the fist is truly stronger than the finger. And so when we come together, and the one thing about being in a region our size is we can move the needle a little faster than if you were in some of these bigger cities or bigger markets. And so we can definitely do it. We just need to come together and collaborate. And so now I want to go into some of the questions that were asked ahead of time. And then if time permits, I'm going to go into some of the questions that were posted in the chat. Mariah, this first question is for you. Right now, the youth movement is incredible right now. You all are on the front lines, leading these protests and have this new wave of energy. How can we pipeline this energy of the youth, specifically your demographic, into voter registration and to get them to participate in every election, every time, especially at the local level?
That's a great question. And I think the most important part about that is educating people. How do you register to vote? You know, I'm a college student. How do I request an absentee ballot? Or I don't want to go out because of COVID. How can I vote by mail? And things of that nature. And making those resources knowledgeable to not only the younger generations, but to their families as well. And, you know, you can register yourself online to vote. You can go to various locations around Peoria and register yourself to vote. And that's why we had a voter registration drive at our rally, because while we were getting all this attention and all these people, we made sure it was important. Like, while you're here, we need you to register to vote. So I think just educating everyone around you, whether it's your little cousin or your niece, tell them that they need to register to vote. And if they don't know who to vote for, you tell them to go look, you know, educate themselves, go look up, you know, who am I voting for? So when it's time to vote in November and you see all the names, you know what they stand for and you know which people to vote for that will better improve your life.
Thank you so much. And I think those of us who are actively participating in the process of voting, it's our civic duty to educate those and to have patience as well too. I think a lot of times, you know, we feel like, well, they should just automatically participate in this process. Well, when you've been discouraged to participate in this process, why would you? And so it's important for us to you know, create the opportunity for them to get to the polls, explain certain things that are going to be on the ballot that affect them directly, and be that resource for them. So thank you so much, Mariah, for that. Sheriff Asbell, this next question is for you, sir. And this came from a pre-submitted question. Are there any proactive assessments used in your departments to avoid the use of force, such as de-escalation tactics or fit for duty evaluations on a frequently occurring basis?
That's an interesting question. Kind of a complex question too. Just for my agency and by design, this really starts with the hiring practice, and I'll kind of backtrack and explain why. One of the requirements that I have is, unless it's an outlier or a different situation coming from a different agency, all of our patrol officers start in the jail. They learn communication. Policing, corrections, this job is 95% communication. And you learn how to de-escalate situations by working in a correctional environment. It's been a tremendous program. We've had much success, and you have to realize policing in the county is different than policing in the city. When you go to a call, your backup might be 30 minutes away. So you have to learn how to communicate. You have to learn how to de-escalate a situation just by design. I mean, there's drive time and all that involved. But as for the use of force and fit for duty status, wow, complex, because each of these situations they're unique, and there's different variables that would change how these situations play out. For example, if we're talking about a situation with an officer-involved shooting, there's now clear-cut rules by state legislation what has to be involved. You have to have a third party, typically the state police or a third-party agency, investigate the incident. There's a mandated drug and alcohol screening after any incident. However, it doesn't require you to have a fitness or a psychological exam done or anything like that. But we do have that in our personal policy here. If you're involved in a critical incident, a use of force situation, an officer-involved shooting, that we require that you have, you know, at least one session with a psychologist. So that brings the question, what do you do in these lesser offenses? I mean, what do you do if there's an altercation where a taser's used? if there's, use of force when putting someone into handcuffs, and you have that physical altercation. And the best way you really have to look at that is you have to have policies in place to manage that. And you have to look for patterns too. If you start to see patterns of behavior which show aggressiveness or obsessive behavior, that's going to, prompt you to possibly send someone in for, a fitness evaluation. But each circumstance is different, and you manage them different. When, as an administrator, it's sometimes hard. You have to look at every complaint or use of force situation and make a decision at the very onset whether this should be treated criminally or internally, because there's different rules which apply, and you don't want a due process violation. You have to be very calculated if you do this. So complex situations, but yes, it's about leadership. It comes down to that. It comes down to having the right leadership within an agency to make sure the people that work for you are doing the right thing. And I've said that too many times. My name's on the door. You represent me. And you have to make sure that you're, living by your own standards and your own rules.
Thank you so much, Sheriff. Really appreciate that. Dr. Ali, this question is for you. Can the inequities in our region be permanently improved if local leaders continue to adapt policies which restrict quality and accountability?
Absolutely not. We have to address equity in a comprehensive way that includes all key stakeholders, and we have to have pro-equity policies and procedures. We cannot continue to implement policies that fail us in this area. So the answer is absolutely not. We have to make good policies that benefit everybody and without discrimination. We have to listen. And I think that Mariah said that. We have to listen to the people who are complaining about being mistreated or underserved or in some way. Over the years, I've handled discrimination complaints as part of my job. I don't actually do that directly now, but I've handled those complaints, and people need to be listened to because oftentimes they have a legitimate concern that has to be addressed.
Thank you. Again, that level of empathy has to be there. Thank you, Dr. Ross. Mariah, I'm gonna go off cuff real quick because I have a question for you. You bring a unique perspective being a current college student. You're at Howard University, which is an amazing institution. And my goal would be for you to go to Howard, graduate, and come back to Peoria and lend your talents to us. And we have a lot of people part of the business sector in various capacities on this call right now. So can you be an advocate on behalf of young people like yourself who are getting formally educated? And what will it take for you to return back to Peoria after graduation?
So that's exactly what I plan to do after graduating from Howard University and going to law school to become a civil rights attorney. I plan to come back to Peoria and run for office and become a politician and really make the change that I want to see in Peoria. And I hope that while I'm gone, even if you do not have the opportunity or you don't want to go outside, travel to DC for school and just want to stay here in Peoria, the education's just as great. If you want to see your community change, be the change. You can't just talk about it, you have to be about it. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. And so I encourage all young viewers listening, do not leave your hometown behind after you've succeeded. It's important to give back into your community that raised you.
Mariah, you're gonna make me shed a tear. You're gonna make me shed a tear. That was amazing. And I'm in a group chat with like 10 of my buddies, and only like 2 of us are still in Peoria, and some are in Dallas, some are in Phoenix, some are in Atlanta. And I always tell them, well, my goal is to improve Peoria, to make you want to come back and to make it a city that you want to come back and raise your family in. I'm blessed to be raising my family here right now. And I want those like yourself that are getting educated. We want you to come back to Peoria. We want to retain our talent. So thank you so much for. I had to throw a curveball in there, but I'm like, man, we got the ears right now. So business leaders, if you're listening, this is what it's going to take for us to retain our young talent. So thank you, Mariah. Sheriff, this next question is for you, and this is from the chat. How can we change the law enforcement and police culture and the type of officers that it breeds?
Goes back to one of my previous answers. I mean, it starts with leadership. It starts with hiring practices, time to hire the right people, and just kind of what you just talked about, Andre, hiring locally, hiring people that live in the community, that their children are being raised here, going to the school districts. And there's a sense of ownership when you have individuals that live and work in the same community. The culture, culture's hard. I mean, you got to understand, policing is actually a subculture. You often, when you go in this profession, you're alienated by your own friends and sometimes family. And maybe that's part of the problem too, where you become such this closed group. But I've also said this is a conversation for police and community. Meaning, the police we're asked to do a lot. We're asked to wear a lot of different hats, and you're not trained on every hat to wear. It's not very often we get invited to the party, but we get called once there's a fight or it gets shot up. And you have, every encounter is a bad encounter. And that's what we have to stop the culture. We have to have more, cooperation. We have to have friendship, being part of the community, and the community seeing the police officer in that same light. So there's work that needs to be done on both sides. It can be done, but it starts with a mindset, but more importantly, it starts with a heart, with everyone having the heart to do the job right.
Definitely. And it goes back to, I think you said earlier, your values and understanding who you are before you put on the uniform, and keeping those, even though you're going to be put in some difficult situations. So thank you so much, Sheriff, for that transparency. Charlie, what would you tell business leaders currently on the call that they can do to take action with their power and privilege before we leave today?
Well, I would say that business leaders can go back and meet with your employees and have some dialogue around this topic, and to ask them, what can we do? What can we do to be part of the solution? I heard from an organization today, a large organization today within our city, that says that they want to be a part of this solution, and they want to work together to begin to address diverse workforce issues and other issues in terms of some of their practices. So I think that's the start, is to have some dialogue within your organization around these topics, knowing that we all need to be open to change, and then what can you do to be a part of that solution?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think that this is a good time to audit some of your policies and your procedures, to see, whether it was, unintentional, which I would be optimistic to assume, that, they could be potentially disenfranchising different ethnic groups. So this is a great time to do that, review our policies and our procedures to make sure they're equitable for everyone in our region. Mariah, I want to ask you this next question. All right, you just give me such a sense of enthusiasm. Thank you so much. What do you think is the next step for Peoria in this region to be inclusive for all of its citizens? What would you like that next step to be? We've raised the awareness. And awareness is great, and we got to continue to keep beating that drum. But what, in your opinion, is the next action step that you would like to see?
Kind of touching on what I said earlier, policy, as well as I know it's hard to have community gatherings because of COVID and everything, but having more conversations like this, looking at what Peoria has implemented or not implemented, and how can we advocate to change that? Looking at the region and the stats of Peoria, I'm pretty sure we are ranked the 6th worst place for African Americans to live. That's an issue. We also have one of the most segregated school systems in the country. That's also an issue. What policies can we put in place to make sure that we are not number 6 for the worst place for African Americans to live? That's why a lot of people leave, because there's no opportunities and resources here. So we need to start looking at Peoria and looking at what can we do better, what policies may need to go away, and what do we need to put in place. And if our council members or elected officials are unwilling to do that, then we need to hold them accountable.
Thank you, Mariah. Sheriff, I'm gonna ask you kind of a similar question. What is the next step for law enforcement in this region to ensure that it's not only equitable for all of our citizens, but also ensuring that it's beneficial for all of our citizens as well?
So much. I know Dr. Ali has a council meeting tonight, and I'm being all honest, finances is just part of this conversation. When I talk about police legitimacy, I've got 62 people on layoff right now. So it's going to make the problem worse when you talk about legitimacy. When an officer is just going from call to call to call to call to house to house to house, they're going to have attitude. They're going to go there and they're just going to manage, and it's just going to be a bad situation all the way around. So we have to live within our means. I understand that, but we have to rethink how we do this business. Again, you just have to have that strong foundation. I've said this too many times. Why do we have a war on poor people? We should have the war on poverty. That should be the focus, and we can change so many outcomes with focusing and putting our resources in the proper buckets. I mean, the cost of incarceration. I mean, this is the prison industrial complex. I mean, this is hundreds of billions of dollars. I'll argue trillions. $1 trillion a year if you look at the collateral costs, childcare, food subsidy programs, all these other things that are linked in. That's where these dollars should go. And I keep on going back to what everyone else is saying is education and Bodhi. And education is the key. So much that we can do, and that's where our focus should be.
Thank you, Sheriff. Those preventative measures and reallocating those costs into our underserved communities is very important. So thank you so much. Dr. Ali, excuse me, I have a question from the chat here. Are the city's institutions implementing any implicit bias training that you're aware of?
There is implicit bias training that is being conducted for police officers for the city of Peoria. The training is jointly conducted by Officer Daniel Duncan and Professor Anthony White from Illinois Central College. And Anthony White, Dr. White, also has a law enforcement background. So it's really kind of like law enforcement is providing training for law enforcement, and they do an outstanding job, outstanding curriculum. So they're providing that training. We're also talking about bringing in some additional training to the community, to employees in terms of cultural competencies, implicit bias. But those discussions are just.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that context. And so I have one last question, and then you all are off the hot seat. So I know it's getting a little hot in here right now. I think my screen's getting a little blurry. I'm just joking. So we've got this momentum going right now. The fires are burning. How do we continue this momentum to ensure that the next news cycle doesn't distract us from this. All right. And I'm going to start with you, Mariah, and then I'm going to go to Sheriff Asbell, and then I'll conclude with Dr. Ali.
So firstly, I wanted to add a point to the other question you asked me. I think what's really important that Peoria can do, and I saw someone just mentioned it in the chat, and I was going to say exactly that, but we need to make sure the curriculum teaching in Peoria Public Schools is accurate, and that Black history is American history, and it needs to be taught. As a District 150 student, it's unfortunate that I had to learn about Juneteenth on my own. I did not learn that in school. With civil rights, all you hear about is Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and they try to pit them against each other, and that's completely not the situation at all. And just other things that I've been informed while attending at HBCU that completely contradicts what I learned in this school system. So I think it's really important that we are teaching Black history, which is, again, American history, better in our school system. And then could you repeat your other question, because I wanted to make sure I said that.
Oh, yeah, no, sure. No. Somebody me. Sorry, I'm back. No, when those thoughts are going, you got to let them ride. So no, you're good. My question though was, right now we have a lot of momentum going right now. You know, people are excited, they're passionate, and they're wanting change. But how do we bottle this momentum and continue moving forward and not let it get lost in the next news cycle or the next story that could surface up to potentially derail us from this positive momentum that we have currently?
Right. I think that's really important. Something I've been seeing in the media, you know, the trends of Black Lives Matter is starting to go down. There still has not been justice served for Breonna Taylor. The media is starting to go back to normal. This is my Black life. Whether it's trending or not, I have to protect it, and I have to protect all oppressed groups. So we need to keep that momentum going, continue to educate ourselves, continue to hold city officials accountable, and to continue to build within our own community. And as long as we keep that up, it doesn't matter what's trending on the media, because we will be having the change, and hopefully we won't have another tragedy happen on national television that, you know, sparks all of this.
Thank you so much, Mariah. Sheriff Asbell?
Thanks, Andre. I'm actually disappointed that we're at this point already, meaning we just went through this health pandemic and you had multiple press conferences every day by the governor or local health department. That's where we should be with this same conversation. I mean, look at this as a pandemic, because it truly is. It's been going on for 400 years. So we just have to not stop the conversation. I mean racism, it can be like a virus. Look at it as a virus. And there's a lot of people that are asymptomatic and they don't even know they have it. And we have to focus on that. We have to keep the conversation. We need people. I'm an elected official. Keep me accountable. Keep me accountable. So thank you.
Wow. Racism, and some people are asymptomatic. Sheriff Asbell, woo, man, you got me there. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Dr. Ali?
Sheriff is deep. So I think that we have to act fast. We have to put some things in place. We need a framework for addressing racial justice and equity within our government, within our city. We have to bring key stakeholders together to commit to this framework. I think that we have to build it. We have to engage the public so that it doesn't fizzle and go away. I mean, we had things that happened after the Rodney King incident, and we had action plans. We had discussions on race and social justice. A lot of people involved, and some things got improved and other things kind of died off. But I think we need some permanency. We need to build some systems and a framework in place that continues the discussion, that continues the work, so that it doesn't fall by the wayside, and so that we continue to make constructive improvement within all these different areas and all the different things that affect all the different areas that are impacted.
Thank you. Wisely said, as always, Dr. Ali. Well, thank you so much to our participants. We are getting close to 5 o'clock, and Dr. Ali has a city council meeting that she has to jet to, and Mariah has probably a million things that she's working on, and Sheriff Asbell probably hasn't taken a day off since he's been elected. So, you know, they've got things to do, but we really appreciate all the participants on this call. It really demonstrates the commitment to this important topic that this region is demonstrating. So we really appreciate you all for attending a big table discussion series, Gather Around Justice. We plan on having some ongoing discussions in the future. So please follow the Big Table Facebook page, and then also the Peoria Chamber of Commerce website as well too, for additional information. Again, my name is Andre Allen. I appreciate the opportunity to serve as the moderator for this amazing panel. If everybody can use their reactions and give these people a little hand clap there, like I just put up in my corner, because they deserve it. They worked very hard today, and they brought some great context to the table. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Audrey Kim or Shanika Cagle if you all have any closing remarks, and we'll get these good people out of here.
I don't have any remarks. I'm just so thankful for everyone on this call, and thank you to everyone who participated. You'll be getting a follow-up survey after this, and like I said, we'll be sending out some more information and keep everybody updated on how this is going to keep going. So thank you everyone for participating, and have a great night, everyone.
Awesome. Sounds good. Take care, everyone.